Welcome to Final Cut Pro podcast number 6, covering filters and effects. In this podcast, we're going to be discussing how we can apply filters and effects to the vision and the sound in your project. Video filters are applied to the vision in your project to alter or change their nature or what they look like. To apply a filter, you go to the Effects tab in the browser. And you will notice here, if I click this little triangle, the video filters open up here. Now you can see there are heaps of options when it comes to filters. And to tell you the truth, the only way to know what each of them does is to go through and experiment and to try them and to see what they do to your footage. I guess in this instance, what I might do is just show you one or two examples of the kind of things you can achieve. But really, the extent of them is quite massive. As you can see, there are quite a few in this folder. The first example I might show you is in the blur folder. You can see in the blur folder that there are all different types of blurs that you can apply to your footage. For this instance, let's apply the radial blur. To do that, I grab it here in the browser and I drag it down into the timeline and pop it here on my footage. You can see instantly it has actually done something to the image over here in the corner. But if I double click it and I got to my viewer window and go to Filters tab, I can actually make further changes to it. And you can see that I can actually, in this instance, change the angle of the blur. I can change how many steps or how dramatic that blur is. And I can also change its center point. At the moment it's 0, 0, which is right in the middle. And what I could do is change that. So in this instance, it's moved up just slightly. Now that's what it looks like with the radial blur applied. To actually take that filter off, if I decide that that's not what I want, I would untick that button there. So when I tick it on, you can see the radial blur applied, and when I take it off, you can see that it's there, simple. If once I have played with all these different determinants to change the look of my radial blur, if I want it to go back to the default settings it had when I first applied that filter, I just press the cross button here, and that will actually take it back to where it was when I first began, which was the center at 0, 0, the steps as 2 and the angle at 10. What I'm going to do now though is turn off the radial blur and just press this button so it pops back up like that. And let's have a look at something else or something else we might be able to do. So if I go back here to my video filters, I might go now to image control, and in image control I can try color balance. And I can drop that again down onto my piece in the timeline. So when I double click it and go to filters, you can see here that I now have several sliders of things I can change. So I could actually change the color to make it more red, or I can make it more green, or of course more blue. So in this way I can actually change the real look of the piece. I can also maybe take some of the green out or some of the red out, which will, if I take them down to 0, will give me very much another look altogether. And that's something you can play around with to get your colour balance looking different. Of course, with colour balance, you can adjust it slightly to give it a slightly more blue tinge, or you can be quite dramatic and go for that real blue overtones in that piece. Once again, if I want it to go back to its original settings, I can press the cross button, which takes it back to 0, 0, 0, which is equivalent to not having the filter on there at all. Likewise too, if I uncheck it, it will not be active, or if it's ticked, it will be active. So I might just make that a little bit bluer like that. You will notice at this point that a red line has appeared here above my footage. What happens when we actually make alterations to our footage in the timeline is that it creates these different looks. And you'll notice where my text and colour is, there is a blue line just there above. What that blue line means is that yes, there have been changes made to my footage, but my computer speed is fast enough to be able to play that text and that colour at the same time in real time. So when I press play, then it can play it because my computer speed is fast enough. Now, if I go back here to my sand dunes piece, obviously at this point, my computer speed is not fast enough to deal with this change that I've made to this whole clip of it being more blue. So it appears with a red line. So if I try to play that, you'll see that it just says unrendered. The way to fix that is if I go up to Sequence, Render All, Both, and I click that, what it will do is it will actually remember what those changes are, and it creates a render file. And you'll remember back to when you set up your project and there was a folder called render files. Well, that will actually sit in that render files, and now the computer has actually another file or a render file that it refers to, which it can play back in real time in that timeline. So now that the red line is gone, I can now press play and it can play it with that blue hue over it. The next thing I want to talk about is also audio filters. So in here we've been looking at video filters, and there's quite a few varieties of things in there, but also there are audio filters. And you can look in your audio filters and you can see there are all sorts of things you can do to your audio. There's things in there like hum removers, notch filters, all sorts of things, but we might just have a look at reverberation. So if I grab the reverberation filter and pop it on one of my sounds, so I might put it on my underwater sound there. So when I double click on that, you can see up here in the viewer window there's a filter there, and you can actually, like the video filters, change the effect mix, the effect level, the brightness of it, that kind of thing. We can look at the type of reverberation. We can make it in a tunnel maybe, so we can have a listen to that. So it's going to actually change my sound. So when I play my water, you can hear that reverberation. If I unclick it, you can hear what it sounded like before. So obviously there are some distinct changes when I apply the reverberation filter. And just like the video filters, you can see that in here there are several folders with lots of different distortions, reverberations, and different changes you can make to your sound. Once again, the best way to experience those is by trial and error. So please feel free to apply some of those to your work and have a listen and hear what they do. The next thing I'm going to look at is actually video layering, and this is another way of applying effects to your work. If I go back here to my media files and go to video, I might grab another piece of footage here. So we might go for my bees and wattle, and I'm just going to apply an in and an out point, and I'm going to drag that down here on top of my reeds like that. I'll just make it shorter so it's just on top of my reeds. And so now I have two lots of footage there in that timeline. Now the bees and wattle being on the higher video line actually hides the reeds footage underneath, because the one on top will be the most dominant image. Now there is a couple of things we can do with this. What we could do is, if I was to double click on my bees and wattle and go to motion, I could change the opacity of that top image. So I could actually reduce how opaque it is, so I can start to see the reeds underneath. And you can see there, if I do that, that they will now play on top of each other like that. So that's one option I could use. Another option I could do is, if I go to my crop here, I could actually crop this image. So maybe take out the right angle there, so that I could have the reeds in the right hand side of my image and the wattle in the left hand side. And once again, when I play that, we would have reeds and wattle. The next option, which I could do, is if I go up to this frame here and make sure my image and wireframe is on, which by clicking this button here, I make sure image and wireframe are selected, I can now actually change the size of that top image, and I can make it whatever size I like. So now I could have that image and I could sit it down here in this corner. So we could have those two images playing at once as different sizes. Or I could also grab the lower image, my reeds image, and reduce its size as well by grabbing the corner here. Where is it there? And I could have one image on one side and this image on this side. So in that way you could have multiple images on your screen. Of course, you could have as many video images on your screen as you like, because you can keep adding additional video layers up, I think, to about 99 different video layers. To add a different video layer, for example, if I wanted to add something up above that onto V4, which you can't see at the moment, I would literally just drop it in at V4 and you can see that those additional lines do start to appear. So right there I can have the birds. Once again, it is the top image, so it is the most dominant. So in order to see the images below, I would have to either change its opaqueness or its size or some other factor so I could see what's going on underneath. If I wanted that image to be sitting underneath and to be filling in all my black areas, I would have to move my other two images up and put my bird image on the bottom, and then I could actually make that image full size and take up that whole screen underneath. And now we would have those three images playing at once. So as you can see, there is a lot you can do with your images, with layering of images, as well as having straight cuts between images. So using these effects, you could actually build up quite a visual feast of all different images happening at once, using either opacity, crop, or changing the size of these images. Thank you for listening to our Final Cut Pro episode on filters and effects. The next episode on Final Cut will cover compression and exporting out of Final Cut Pro.